Today, I'm going to be talking about my influences, and I think that's just a very important thing. There is an artist on this planet. Parker just defined what caricature really was to me and also shape. As you can see, as I'm drawing over these faces, they're just very simple, basic shapes that I really was drawn to, and these are sort of exercises that I would do as I was drawing over these characters. One thing I learned from Mort too was not only did he had such a variety in the way he used drew eyes and noses and mouths, but just capturing people, but his beautiful line work, his ink work was just so great too. And as you see as I go through all my influences, you'll see everyone has just something in common. There's just something in common about the way they all not necessarily drew. They didn't have the same style, but they were all the same sort of basic things going on. Another great thing about Mort's work, which was really inspiring to me, was the way he drew hands. And after being able to meet my hero and speak with him, he would tell me how much he used to he has a mirror in front of him and just draws hands looking at the mirror and different things like that. So that's something that I definitely implied. My influences weren't didn't come from animation. I never thought that I would be in animation. I was his technique, his shapes, his energy, his action. I loved the way he drew big feet, and big hands. It was just everything about his work that really was inspiring to look at. So if you get a chance just to look at some of Jack Davis's work, it's one of my influences because that's really what I was always looking at and what I was looking for. So it's a great exercise to do. Here's another great piece. And as you can see, these characters in the background, they're just so loosely drawn. And this is a rough preliminary sketch that he had done for an illustration. But you can see the whole thought process is done. Look at the variety in shapes that he would use, from using ovals and squares and into triangles within his characters. And just as I'm drawing over these, you can just see with the red line that it's really predominant. Those characteristics are just really coming out. So these are things to really think about as you're drawing. These are things that really help me. His line of action, just the energy, the force, the feeling behind his drawings was so powerful and had so much thrust and energy. It was really, every time when I draw, I try to think about certain things like that I can really put into my drawing just to kind of give it a bit more life. Typically with animation, when you're doing your front three-quarter views, they can be pretty static. Here's another great example of Jack's work, with his line of action, his thrust and his cartooniness and the energy that was put into his drawings. So this is something that I really paid attention to and is what makes someone your influence, what inspires you about them. When you look at just even this preliminary sketch, they're not flushed out feet, they're not flushed out hands. You're not examining the whole drawing, but the whole drawing in itself is solid and it's there and it's exciting. Here's another great piece that Jack had done. He was really great at using a paintbrush and using brush and ink. So he would typically use like Winsor Newton number 2 brushes and any other sort of pen and ink brush, even just a regular Sharpie. And just his line work and his cross hatching was just so detailed and so beautiful that it was very reminiscent of other illustrators that I'm going to show you within my influences. And you can see how everything is just kind of tied and kind of works together. Here's another great piece, just real loose cartoony. These sketches almost remind me of a Hanna-Barbera type of cartoons. But look at the use of small, medium, large shapes just within these. And it's one of those things where a lot of these cartoons, one thing that Jack Davis taught me too was staying loose. And as you can see in this sketch, it's so loose, it's so rough, it's just so much energy. There's not really, at this point, a care for the construction or anything else within there, yet it's still a solid drawing. So that kind of gave me, the just inspiration just when I draw, just to sketch loose, stay loose. Don't be afraid. Don't feel that you need to do a tight drawing right off the bat. Don't feel that you need to nail it on the first try. Just keep your drawings loose, and most importantly, just have fun with it, because the more you get into that cycle and that energy of having fun, the looser, more dynamic your drawings will be. And then you can take these rough sketches, once your concept is out, lay another piece of paper over it and start drawing over it. So that was another fine example as to why Jack Davis was such a hero of mine. Here, once again, looking at a preliminary sketch of his, just the energy, look how long the legs are, just the fun that he was having within these designs. And even this guy on the bottom, just a great shape, just so pushed and exaggerated. And he was really great at manipulating and pushing proportion. And that's another thing that all these artists that were influences of mine really had a knack for and just do, was pushing and playing with the proportion. And great. So the biggest thing that I can encourage you to do as an artist, especially learning, is to experiment as much as you can. Another great influence of mine was Paul Coker Jr., another Mad Magazine artist. As you can see, I'm just kind of going over, breaking down the different shapes within his designs too. I just like the way that he used blacks within his design, and once again, the proportions that he always went for were always extremely appealing. One of the things I liked too was the extreme looseness of his work. It was so loose, seemed so quick. It seemed, who knows how long it took him to do these drawings, but there, within his work, there was such a great energy. So that's something that I adapted to as well. And just the way he draw hands or things like that, you can see just how loose he was using. And he would use like a fountain pen, a ballpoint, not a ballpoint pen, but a gelato nib of some sort. Here's another example of Paul's work, another great, use of shapes. Just a simple circle for the head, breaking down into almost a triangle within there, and then another big circle, another small, medium, large shapes. Once again, it's not that they're thinking so much about that, it just, their eye lets them know this is what works. Within this general over here, it's very fun, very fluid, just this big square shape with these other shapes countering it with almost the triangular feet, and the triangular shaped hat. And just, as you can see, as I'm just drawing over this, you get a picture of what I'm kind of trying to get at, where you'll see that a lot of all these artists really have all these same unique elements of design within their work. This drawing I always thought was funny, and here we have a prime example of using large against small, and also getting into the figure eight, which I'm going to be discussing a lot within this series. You can see the small hat with the large face, the small eyes, the big nose, the big round body countering that, and just the great action that he had within this drawing, and the little squiggles that kind of go on everywhere, which give the energy just a lot of life and great stuff. Here is probably one of my all-time favorites, which is Al Hirschfeld. Al Hirschfeld, he was the man of line. This guy could draw so well and had such great rhythm within his design and drawings. It just, I think, appeals to me and appeals to everyone that's ever seen his work. He had such a great variety and use of shapes, and I always thought, personally, with his cleanup line, I thought he just did these single strokes. I finally came to a point where I realized that he didn't, that he really just kind of scratched those lines in there. But it was something, as I was trying to learn, I was getting good at using the brush pen, thinking, well, that's how Al Hirschfeld did it. Just great feet, the great shapes, great energy, great rhythm, great flow, you name it, Al Hirschfeld had everything. Here's another example of his caricaturing ability and his rhythm and his flow within all that the shapes that he does. Just breaking down the shapes, seeing how things work, the small head with the larger body, just a lot of great rhythm. This Laurel and Hardy was just terrific. I just have always loved just these breaking it down really for these with Laurel, these three simple shapes, and changing it and manipulating the size variations, and the same with Hardy with the small hat, breaking it down into these three different shapes. The one that I'm going over now, you can see the face shape is just almost this triangular shape, very unique, very fun. And also here, as we have Humphrey Bogart too, just that nice shape that's going on, almost looks like a chili pepper of some sort. So shapes can be found in anything and used to your advantage as you draw within your design. Here we have some Fred Astaire drawings. Just, as I'm going over this, I'm just feeling the motion, feeling the line of action, feeling that energy, breaking up the shapes, and just really analyzing how it works. Once again, it's not about tracing over Al's drawings and drawing it line for line, because at that point you're just copying and you're not learning. The idea behind observing and influences is really trying to figure out how they did it, trying to think about it. That may not be the reality, that's maybe not what they were thinking, but if it makes sense to you and you get something out of that, that's the most important part, and that's what you'll take with you. So really, I can't stress enough just to observe and look at your different influences that you're going to find throughout your life as an artist. Here's another one of my great influences, was Norman Rockwell. I never learned how to paint really or do anything like that, but his energy, his life, his caricaturing ability, everything about his work, his design, whatever it was, I remember at a very young age, at around 10 years old, I just fell in love with Norman Rockwell's work. As you can see, as I'm going over this drawing, just the exaggeration of that, almost in a Jack Davis kind of way. Jack Davis came after, but you can really just see the fun and the energy that he had within his line. This drawing right, painting right here is another great use of caricature. I just love the way that he really, once again, pushed his shapes as he kind of drew over everything. One of the most important things to keep in mind is not to just be influenced by just one person, because then you'll just limit yourself and your work if you're just following the trend of one person. So it's important to really be diverse and look at many different people and be inspired by many different artists, and that's what's going to really kind of help you grow and help you see things. As I'm going over this outline, even within the design itself, it's just got a great use of all the negative space around it. Plays as much of a part in the design as does the positive space. He has great balance just between these different objects that are coming out, from the paper to the cigar to the hot dogs. So once again, look at everyone. Rockwell, I love the way he just did hands, feet, anything else that he did, his expressions. Here we have another prime example of Rockwell's ability to caricature. And he was a great cartoonist. If you've ever seen some of his work from very early on, when he was drawing for the Boy Scouts and different things, he had a just great sense of cartooning ability. And here you can really see how the legs are so long and the face is so small, and the balance just between the big glove and the small hat, the red hat, is something to really examine and work on. So look at those small, medium, large shapes. Once again, this is all part of a natural sense of design. These are all part of the fundamentals of design, which you'll see that goes in every single artist's work, from Norman Rockwell to Paul Coker and everyone else. It's just how they approached it. Some were more realistic, some were a lot more cartoony. This piece was always funny. The thing is, which is so important too, is beyond just the design, is the idea. Having these great ideas is another thing that's important to just the whole design and appeal of a drawing. Because if these figures were just standing straight and just looking at each other, there wouldn't be anything fun about it. On to one of my next favorite artists, which I came across later on, was J.C. Leyendecker. He was actually just, Norman Rockwell was heavily inspired by J.C. Leyendecker. And the beautiful thing about J.C.'s work was just his shapes. This guy was a designer's designer. Everything about him, every little shadow was a design. The way that he drew hair in these shapes was a design. The natural just flow, you can just kind of see the spacing within the hair. It's not clumsy. It's all there for a reason. It's all there for a purpose. Just the little white dots just kind of throughout, hinting the design elements there. They're not parallel. They all have a purpose. They all have a reason. This guy was really a huge influence to me, and it was mainly because of all the shapes and understanding how to really pick out shapes within the designs. This is another great piece. I just always like this, and of these soldiers. It was if you ever get a chance, there are some books on JC, but I'll be honest, they're not the greatest books. A lot of his work, they just show it in black and white. So if you can find some that have these color ones, it's really amazing. But look at the use of the negative space within his characters that he uses. And once again, even with the cloth and the drapery, everything was a design, everything had a reason, everything had a shape. And the more you focus on that and just look at his drawings and work off of it, and try to practice those little shapes, it'll be very useful to you to really start to understand that. And on this piece, I'm going over the shadows again. I'm going over the creases and folds in the pants. It's not rendered so much that it's got all these blending shapes and everything. It's just very solid. And even the hair, as you look at the way that J.C. Leyendecker approached drawing hair, was just great. Everything that he did, this guy was a true master. So definitely keep an eye out for his work. Another great piece by J.C. Leyendecker was this general pattern that he had done. It's just, to me, it was just amazing, and it amazed a lot of people. And that's why Rockwell, everyone always tried to figure out, how did he use these paints? How did he get this quality? Like I said, I never learned how to oil paint. I don't oil paint. I don't consider myself a painter, but that's why it's important to not just to look everywhere. Observe everything. If something grabs you, if you feel it, if you look at a piece of artwork and you're moved by it, then it's worked. It's done what it's supposed to do. It's inspired you. And that inspiration is going to give you enough momentum to start experimenting and doing your own work. Another great piece. Just look at the balance that is going on in this piece. It's just beautiful. Here's another great piece with this. It's great to kind of see his little study before he does his finished piece. But here we have just a baby's face, the baby features with the large cranium, the big eyes, the nice rosy cheeks on the face with the little face down there and the little tiny nose. And it's just beautiful. Once again, the whole picture itself is just balanced beautifully. Its design is just phenomenal. Here's another piece by J.C. Leyendecker. It's a preliminary painting for another piece that he had done. But you can just see, once again, the use of design, the shapes, the flow. Look at the sort of negative spaces that are going on. Look at the hands. Look at the way that he really just approached everything in just such a simple, clear, elegant way. His use with, straights against curves within his design as much as you can. And even the sword, when you look at the sword, just the great design within that sword is enough in itself. Look at the use of blacks, where within that beard is a shape within itself. So always keep an eye out for this sort of thing, and when you get a chance, look at J.C. Leyendecker's work. You'll be blown away. And another one of my influences was the great Don Flowers. Not only did he have just such a great looseness within his line, but he also had just great fluidity within his line. And it was everything that he did with the folds in his clothes and the wrinkles was just very appealing to, much like Hank Ketchum. His work was just beautiful to me. He has also just a great balance of blacks, and light within his compositions too. He was really great at doing that. And looking at this woman, You can just see just the great attitude. Not sexy women, they usually tend to be obese or something else, but just looking at the way he drew women and men for that matter, once again, so much appeal. Just look at the balance and the feeling and the weight of this character as it's broken down. The way he would draw hands, just very elegant, very appealing. And just breaking down even this woman's face shape is just so beautiful, and the way that the hair is shaped and leading up towards the nose. I believe that all these things are intentional as one does it. He really had ideal proportions within the women that he would draw, which was just beautiful to just look at, as you can see. Even the way he would handle feet or anything else, you can get so much. I just need to grab books sometimes and I just flip through them. Merely, I don't draw anything, I just grab my books and I look through them and I go, wow, that's great. And it just gives me that little bit of energy to start drawing if I'm having a bad drawing day. So always keep that in mind. If you're struggling with drawings or having a bad time, go pick up a book of your favorite artist, and that'll be enough to get you going again. And here's the great Hank Ketchum. This guy was just, everything about his work was beautiful, and just that little shape, it looks like a small little eye, lowercase I, with Dennis the Menace, some of his earlier cartoons that he had done variations on him. Such appealing lines, such appealing shapes. And as I'm drawing over the chef right here, you can once again see breaking it down into the basic shapes. Always think from the general to the particular. Hank Ketchum had a great way of drawing folds in clothing too, and that was something that I really latched onto with his work. You would always see where the folds were coming from. There was always that indication that it was following the form and following the shape, and it's something that I picked up on that I definitely use in my work today when I stay extremely loose with my folds and clothings and stuff like that. Much like, unlike, say, Norman Rockwell or something where things became very detailed, you can go the opposite way. Another great thing with Hank Ketchum was his brush. The way he would do brush and ink, the way he would use his nib pens, to capture things, and not to mention just his overall composition is just absolutely beautiful and stunning. He was once again a real natural. Just look at the way the use of darks within the boot, using boots. These are all things that, as an influence, you pick up on these things and you learn from. Again, here you can see just using these just basic little shapes for proportions. It's like almost this ideal cute proportion, just to start with that simple shape and boom, you're done. Now from there you can start creating your own characters, your own world, everything else. He was great at drawing just the feeling of a guy just standing, the feeling of a guy just sitting in so few lines. It was almost Hirschfeld like in many ways. So that also definitely attracted me to his work. He, much like Don Flowers, would have just a great usage of blacks, where he would place his black and lights within his drawing. So if you look at that, it's just doing these black and white drawings really sticks out too. Here we have Dennis the Menace, a couple of different strips again, just beautiful balance within the drawing, great use of blacks, great use of shapes, great use of line, and even when you look at these plants in the back, just that you know what they are, and it's the simplicity of them, and even those have just a great little design to them. And even as we have Mr. Wilson here, I love this pose of the way he's just sitting and the arch, and you can really feel the weight within him as he drew him, and all the little wrinkles that are going on with his pants were just another really great and fascinating thing about Hank Ketchum's work. All right, and another one of my influences was the great Frank Frazetta. With Frank's work, I really learned about the use of shading, and as far as his anatomy, I never went to school to learn anatomy. When I studied life drawing, it was really learning about tone and everything like that within my sketches that I was doing. So when I would draw in front of me the models and have lighting, I would constantly think about the shadow patterns and everything that Frank Frazetta would use. He would really break things down. He was not only just this beast here, you could just see the shadow patterns and everything that are being formed underneath using light and dark. Just another master at what he did. This was one of my favorite pieces too that Frank Frazetta had done. This, not only was it just a great just character, but just the feeling of him. You can really feel the weight and really get what's going on. But understanding and looking at all the sort of muscle patterns that are going on and the shading. So a lot of my earlier work through my experimentation was studying this sort of work, which became, which eventually translated into me doing the sort of work that I do now. But it was through having an understanding of all this helped me progress my work further in the future. It's one of those things where, like Picasso, he was a brilliant draftsman, and because he understood the rules, he could break them. So it's by understanding this sort of thing and this different style and this different technique is going to help you evolve eventually into doing your own style and your own things. But once again, great shapes, great push, great technique, great tone. Everything about this was just a tremendous, tremendous piece, which I thoroughly enjoyed looking at. Now, this piece here, another great Frank Frazetta piece, just great use of balance with this character on a horse, using just a limited color palette, but just the use of blacks and the light and the dark as they just kind of went dark to light, from dark to light, kind of all throughout, creating this just visual unity and balance just within his design itself. It's just really one of my favorite pieces. I actually have a big poster of this hanging up in my studio. Okay, now Ronald Searle. This guy is probably just the king of kings in my book. The amount of people that have been influenced by Ronald Searle, it's almost too many to name, and one of them being my hero is Mort Drucker. But beyond that, so many, so many more. The greatest thing about Ronald Searle is the looseness within his design and his design. This guy could push characters when you look at those proportions. This guy could push it all to the max, to the extreme. He really got it. Everything about his work, when you look at the pointy feet that he did, when you look at balancing with the pointy hat, with the pointy scarf, just everything about his work, another great, brilliant designer. And he just blew me away and still does every time I see his work. This was very complicated piece, but just a piece I wanted to show up there anyway, just to show the different variety and versatility within his work. Just great sense of composition. He had beautiful way of doing color with his watercolors that he did, and once again his pen and ink work. This drawing right here is just to me very funny. Once again, with Ronald Searle, it's all about pushing of the shapes. This, like I said, this guy could just push shapes beyond belief. And as I'm going over this, you can just see how I'm breaking it up into the most simple, basic shapes. And there's such a great balance with large against small and large against small, and the way it even break up the boot with the legs, and that hairstyle framing that one little square box of a face and the square body, once again unifying these shapes. Just really brilliant. Here's another great pen and ink sketch. He was just the master of a pen, too. It was just really brilliant, brilliant stuff. So, break out those Cokewill pens and start playing around with it and just kind of see what you come up with. He could really exaggerate and just push the faces. As I'm going over this hat, you can see, the sort of banal. Just blacken out all these objects, you'd see just a great design because of the great shape that it has as it goes from small to large to small to large to small with the characters as we're going through. So keep that in mind whenever you're drawing. Once again, I don't draw like Ronald Searle, but it's about what he does or what he did, which becomes a real inspiration as I'm going over this. And look at this just simple, almost triangle shape for that whole body, countering all the others. So definitely we're going to be working on this sort of thing a lot as far as varying up your shapes and what you need to do. So as you send your work back to me, I'm going to be going over that quite a bit. So keep in mind, just breaking up your shapes, start simple, think general to particular once again. Here's another great example of variety in shape that Ronald Searle has. Here I'm kind of drawing over just the basic bodies right now. You can see the large circle, the small circle, the medium type circle, the square, triangular feet, the square and triangular hats, and breaking it down into the simple shapes is what made his work so appealing. Not to mention, they all had just possessed a great silhouette. If you blackened in these characters, you could really see who they were and what shape they took. So keep that in mind. Just right next to each other, and just a great push. Just his proportions are so wild, and it's so extreme. You can see what I'm doing by just creating that circle and the triangle. These were the basics, the basis for this design. This is what he's working with. So once you've established that, now you can really start to make things the way you want them. Big eyes, small nose, small eyes, big nose. How can you play around with those shapes? Once again, look at all the different characters I've been going over up to this point. You can see the similarity, different styles, but then again, you look at it and some of it is very similar, but they all understood proportion, they all understood design, they all understood how to make things work. What's great too about Ronald Searle stuff, and Mort Drucker adapted it a lot into his work, was the looseness and roughness of the designs. When you look at the fruit bowl, when you look at the cup, how those were so loose, but they still told the story. He was a great caricaturist. That's just a brilliant Winston Churchill. And look at those simple shapes working against the other guy that's sitting next to him. Just great stuff. And here's a story. These characters aren't standing there like mannequins. There's life about them. Here we have another great example by Ronald Searle of shape variation. So whenever you're going to be designing a lineup of characters, the most important thing to think about is the variation in shape. You don't want them all to be the exact same size. You don't want them to be the exact same thickness. You don't want them to be the exact same weight. This is like looking at people standing in line at an airport, at a bank, at your church, your synagogue, wherever you are. Look at these different types of people and look at the proportions of them and try to capture that. And this is where, once we get into the memory sketching, the things that you're going to really be observing, and that's what you want to focus on and break apart. Here's another prime example of just pushing the characters, pushing their shapes, having these two different characters just walking. You just feel like you've seen them before, like you know them. Look at the use of blacks, how he has black to white, black to white, black to white, and this creates a visual balance within the design. So when you look at it, this is all part of unifying it. Look at the triangular shape that you get just countering each other, almost like an hourglass. And this great physique of this woman, with the little circle of a head and that little tiny body, as it all just kind of, works together. Keeping simple, keeping the variety, as we have once again the small hat with the larger head, the large hat with the smaller head. The more you kind of play around with that, the more you'll start to understand how these things affect proportion, how they affect your design, and how you can just kind of really have fun. Ronald Searle too, he was extremely loose in the way he drew, which was great. And I think this is another prime example of just balance. Look at the negative space. Look at everything that's going on. Look at the small little hat against that square shaped face. Look at that square shaped that body, which almost mimics the face shape, and the little skinny legs, and that even the umbrella that breaks away from the body. Just brilliant. Here's some more of his work. This was great because gives you an idea of what is it like to draw a watercolor on paper that is colored. which can really make a difference to your, art. Once again, look at all the variety and shapes. And here again, using watercolors on colored paper, what sort of effect can you get that's bringing in and experimenting using different mediums? Just look at the basic shapes as you look through Ronald's work a lot. Here we have another piece, another use. I love this page because it's all the same character with the expressions pushed, exaggerated, fun. She's got like a face shape of a bullhorn, or a bell, just for that shape. And then that little square top half of her, the rectangle, and the other shapes, the triangular feet, just breaking it down is just so amazing to look at. It's so inspiring and gives such joy just looking at it. I'm getting excited right now. This is an artist by the name of Eric Sokol, another brilliant draftsman. If you get a chance to look at his work, he did a lot of work for Playboy magazine. Once again, he's definitely in the same school as Mort Drucker, Jack Davis, Ronald Searle. And this guy, he was just brilliant again at pushing shapes, the variety in shapes. And this is the thing that I really got out of them. Practice using wash, doing light washes, and just look at the big hat and the big pipe. Just great stuff. Okay, getting down to the wire here with just a few more influences. This was the great Uderzo, who drew Asterix and Obelix. This I remember from childhood in England. I used to have these comics. I never read them, but they were always lying around my house when I was growing up. And his work is just brilliant. Another great cartoonist. He really understood how to draw hands, great use of shapes, great use of action and feeling and story, almost like the figure eight in the face, and large against small again, and just so much fun, so much energy. Almost then again has that Jack Davis, Mort Drucker sort of feel and understanding about everything that he does, the use of shape. So you can see within all my influences and with all these brilliant artists, they really all do have these unifying elements, and there's a reason why we're attracted to their work and what makes them so great with the work they do. Here's another great artist. This guy goes way back. His name was Charles Dana Gibson. If you haven't seen any of his books, it's definitely worthwhile picking up. He had a great sense of caricature, and more importantly, his pen and ink work was just phenomenal. A lot of people who went on to do pen and ink that you're aware of, they definitely learned and studied from Charles Dana Gibson. He was another huge influence to people and artists everywhere. Once again, playing with this small hat against this big face, playing with this big hat against this smaller face. Just great expressions, great use of line work, and everything about him was just great. So pick up one of his books if you get a chance. Here we have just playing with the body shape too. Just look at the silhouette around it. Look at the negative space that's happening. It's all for a reason. So once again, I had mentioned this before. Don't just focus on the positive space within your design. Focus on the negative space just as much, because that's what's really going to help your artwork grow. Here, like Ronald Searle, when we looked at Ronald Searle's work and we were breaking down that aspect of doing a lineup of characters, the same formula is used again. The same formula is used with that lineup with Jack Davis, with those characters. It's just all handled in a different way. This is somewhat more realistic, but yet the proportions are really pushed. Look at the tiny faces with the big hats and all the big coat. I mean, everything is just pushed in this realistic way, but exaggerated. So it's very interesting to look at the way he would handle drawing and inking, feet. He really followed form with everything that he did with his pen and ink sketching. As you can see, just everything as the drapery comes down, you really get that sense of weight and balance within that, and the use of where he chose to put the darkest darks and the lightest lights really brings a sense of balance and design within itself. So as you can see, as I'm simply breaking up all these basic shapes, if you just start with that when you're doing your lineups with whatever you do, you've hit a home run. And if you have that variety within there, it's great. This piece is really great when you just look at the pen and ink work on this. Look at the way the pen and ink is just following the form of the body as it wraps around. Another great artist, which I haven't mentioned and brought up, is Andrew Loomis. He is just one of those great, brilliant illustrators, too, who was another influence of mine. Everything about his work and his teachings and everything he explained was just right on the money. And all these guys had the exact same thoughts, the exact same way of thinking. And once again, what made him so great, look at the negative space. If you just kind of put that, if you blocked all that in black, you'd get a drawing and a quick read. This is another funny drawing, of a man just standing there. I like playing with this shape variation again. A man with a top hat with this wider. So we're using a rectangle for his top hat. We're using a square shape for his head. We're using a longer rectangle shape for his body shape. Cutting the body in half. Look how you incorporate that triangular shape just within his coat, which is leading up to his face. It's just beautiful, the sort of tapered square feet. One of the greatest things about Charles Dana Gibson, look at the way he drew those shape patterns. This was actually wallpaper, so there's a lot of repeated faces, but it was an idea for that. But even within the hair, when you look at the light, how it reflects in the hair, that pattern within itself is a design element which unifies it and makes it work. Okay, and getting close to the end now of my influences, we have Alice and Martin Provenson. These guys came out in the 50s, 60s, and just they really were designers of their time and have really impacted the animation industry today. When you look at a lot of the stylization and styles that are being drawn for cartoon animation today, really comes from the 50s and 60s, that era, but more so the 50s. It was really such a great, unique look. It was all about straights against curves to the max, but there's such a great understanding with these guys of design and their shapes and their use of shapes. It's really great to study everything about them, from the textures, from the use of large against small shapes. It was just phenomenal to see. So definitely pick up one of their books if you can. A great book that they came out with was called The Animal Fair, and this is where one of those pieces are from. But you can see as I'm going over this how simple they are. The shapes, they really are triangles, they really are circles, they really are rectangles. It's all about how they were placed together and made into an existing design. Something that's great here, you can see the variation with the hat against the face again, the nice triangular shaped body. Something to keep in mind too was the negative space. Look how the negative space is used to really impact the design and clarify it. When you look at it from far, you can really see how it's all comes together as one whole. Even in between the pants and the hand, that little bit of a negative space really helps create the silhouette and make it better. Even the simple net, the way that shape of the net is so basic in shape, sometimes you wouldn't even think about it. But that's why it's important to look at nature and observe, because this is where you're going to find all these shapes and these elements which you're going to eventually be able to put into your own work as you're designing. Next we have Aurelius Battaglia. This is another influence that came to Rockwell, to Leyendecker, as far as breaking down little shapes and pieces, breaking down the negative space even in between the legs, and the variety. So as you're doing a lineup, here we have 4 different characters and they are all extremely unique in their own way. So definitely you owe it to yourself to try to find a book of these guys if you can. There was this book, the Fireside Book of American Songs, is where a lot of this artwork that you're about to see came from. So check it out and look how limited, the palette was, just as far as colors too, was just really great. And even this umbrella here, just broken down into a simple design element with just basic shapes. So we're definitely going to cover a lot of this within this class that I'm going to be teaching here, and you're going to hear me repeat a lot of these things over and over and over again. Here's another great piece, and I put this together just to show you real quickly how you can take, just these simple color elements, and that's all there are. But look at the unity within this. They're all wearing the same uniform. It's just like taking a lineup of vases or a lineup of bottles and just having all different shapes and variety, and that's what you get. So keep that in mind when you're looking at that. This was a really great piece, and wasn't a character, but really is a great design. How really breaking these down into just these simple little shapes all combined together really spell something. They really say something. It's pretty much, as a designer, you're taking letters, and even though they're separate, you're putting them together and forming words, and that's what's happening here. So you look at these lamps, and they're broken up into so many different varying shapes. It's not even, it's not parallel, it's just all unified, works together in a great way. So this is something that really drew me to this sort of work, because it is so different. When you look at Rockwell, when you look at Leyendecker, when you look at Jack Davis, when you look at Mort Drucker, their stuff, even though it's all broken down into shapes, they have a lot of different things going on, wrinkles in clothing and everything else. This was brought down to its bare minimum of just understanding what shape is all about. These cowboy drawings was another great example of just simplifying your shapes and using as very little. They didn't need to have clothes hanging off, a bunch of baggy clothes hanging off like you'd see Jack Davis draw. Everything was unified, and everything was simplified, and everything was condensed into one basic shape. And even as you look at this, just even the shape within his jacket and that shape, that pink area within there, is something to definitely think about as you're designing your shapes. So whenever you get a chance, make sure you check out these guys. They're great. What I'd like to show you right now is just a variety of different ideas and concept drawings that I've come up with. This was for a previous project that I worked on. So I just want to give you a whole idea of how I kind of work and how loose I work. So what I've done here is just done a bunch of development sketches. I was trying to design and come up with a main character. It was for a 50s animated show, and was to have that sort of look and style and feel. So what I did was I went and bought a bunch of books of just 50s clothing, and believe it or not, Sears catalog puts out books not each year, but they've put out catalogs of just their clothing from previous years. So they had clothes from the 1950s. So it was really great to use that as reference. So what I'm doing here is really just coming up with a lot of different ideas and concepts of what I thought this person may look like, looking at the different hairstyles. There were several characters that needed to be done, so it's kind of mixed and matched. So I've just taken pages 8.5 by 11 and just kept everything really loose and really simple, and just tried to see what I can come up with. And that's what it's all about, is their experimentation process of just drawing over and over again, because you're going to find something that hits over another thing. So it's very important. A hairstyle may work, a nose may work, something like that. Here was a bunch of different just quick gestures for the character that I did. Doing the lineups, it's important. Eventually you'll do a lineups to have the variety within all your characters. And here's just to show you something we're going to be getting into, is dealing with silhouettes and making sure that you have a lot of clarity within your designs as you're drawing. Here's some different variations. These were all done in Photoshop, just variations of the different changes this character went through. So it's just a lot of fun, but what it is just pure experimentation throughout this course, but just more in a fundamental way. Here, when I was doing some of these, using the figure eight, which we're going to be discussing, and playing around with different shape variations again, not knowing what the character is going to look like. These are all the different sort of experimentations that I'll go through until you show the director and they'll kind of decide what they want. So as you can see, they're all just pretty loose, some of them tighter than others, different variations on the characters. Every time I was given a new character, it was important to have sort of script definition of what this person was or who they were, so you could kind of work with their personality a bit and try to incorporate it. So something that I do a lot is really go for shapes and variation in shapes. That's my biggest thing. Here, just using Photoshop and color and working with that. Again, working with markers. This is just using different technique and color pencil, trying to come up with different ways and solutions. So you'll see through all these are just a bunch of the same character, but all the different variations, because you don't want to just stop on the very first character you do. You don't want to give up that easily. You need to explore. You need to just create as much variety as you can. I'll mention one of the biggest things again that I've learned in the industry is the discipline is to, once you've drawn one thing, to draw it over and over and over again, and don't just settle on your first drawing, because you don't know what ideas you have in your mind. You don't know what you're going to come up with at any given moment. So it's so important to try to keep playing with that, looking at the different costumes, doing your research, understanding how to draw people and capture people. That way you can really just work in many different styles as well. You can also create on a whim any type of person that you need to create. Say you've been given the task to draw an Indian person, from India. And so you have to know the sort of characteristics and things that happen, African American people, whatever it may be, you need to be able to work in within that sort of realm. So these are all the sort of things as a character designer you're going to be focusing on and working on. You don't just want to have one way of drawing, because you want to give the option to an art director or director that you can be an idea man, that you can create anything that they need. So typically for a feature animation, a lot of the times they're just looking for the sort of just inspirational art, so you can kind of get away with almost doing your style and the way that you do things. But more for television animation, it's so important to have that ability to draw in many different styles, from really simple to really detailed, and that way it's going to give you just more options in the future as you start looking more and more for work. As I'm scrolling through all these, you can just see all the different types of variations, all the different characters I've created, and it's very rewarding. It's a lot of fun working in the industry. It's a lot of fun being able to have the opportunity to work on so many different projects and try to find looks and the way people look. And if, once again, if this is what you want to do, just make sure that you're going to be drawing all the time. So within this 9-week course, you're really going to get an idea of everything that I go through and all the work I go through to really help you try to break into the industry, whether it be in doing greeting cards, whether it be animation, whether it be video games, whatever it may be. It all boils down to having the ability to come up with ideas and draw in the way that you can draw. And here, just playing with some different varieties and characters too. Have fun with it. Just stay, once again, as loose. Here I'm just using jackets, and I would find clothes from different catalogs, and I'd get the story, and they'd tell me, say, about a specific character, and then I could really start saying, have I ever seen this person before? How can I really draw that sort of person? What sort of references can I use? And it's helpful too if you're familiar with movies or actors or different people, because they become a source of inspiration to create characters eventually that you need to do. So also you can ask your director, is there anyone that you have in mind that you would like, that you imagine voicing the character of this person, because doing that sort of thing is really going to help give you an idea. If they tell you they really want this person to look like, say, John Belushi, well, then you're not going to make the person look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. If they've given you that sort of contrast and that idea of what the people are about. Here you can just see just a lot of looseness, really rough, just trying to express my ideas, get things out, get things across, and this is all for director's approval. And you can see just the amount of drawings, and I'm not even showing you all of them. I just want to just show you just a select few of them, just to give you that idea of really what's involved here when you're and what you're about to get involved in as a designer. This is also a great thing for me to show you, just as not necessarily the expectations I have of you, but I would love to just see a lot of variety. When you turn in your assignments to me for me to look at, I would like to see just a lot of loose, rough sketches, a lot of concepts, a lot of ideas, a lot of different approaches. I had a lot of them looking at books on fishermen from different parts of the world, so it just kind of gave me that sort of inspiration to draw these sort of characters. And also looking at different photographs of people and Frankensteining them, creating different looks on how I think, changing people's facial features to create new characters. So this is all part of what it's all about. Character design. What is character design? In order to really move on and progress through this course, we need to break down what character design really is. And that's why I've chosen to kind of put them into two separate categories. One, we have character. The next, we have design. First, I'm going to cover what character is and try to get into the discussion of that. And then I'm going to get into design. Each week as we do this, we're going to understand more and more about what it means to actually design. But first off, I just want to give you the initial basis. Design itself. What do we know about design itself? And that is, design is really all about problem solving. It means to plan, it means to organize, and once we grab things and arrange things in a certain way and create some sort of visual pattern with all our shapes that we produce, then you start to really create design. And the task of a designer is to convey an idea or a theme, a concept. A lot of it relies on observation, is one of the key factors to design. It's just always observing, always looking, trying to find new ideas and looking for different things. So within the observation comes life experience. So the more you explore, the more you look, the longer you live, the more things you do. I think that's how, as designers, we eventually grow and you do become better. When you think about when you were younger and you didn't really understand how things worked, and all of a sudden they just kind of hit you at a certain age, that's due to life experience that you've started to see more things. Design itself is also, it's not necessarily just about having that concept or idea, but it's also about when your design expresses an idea that is very unique and clever to the person viewing it. So once they see that and understand, they can see, wow, I really get it, I understand it. So it's very important to have clarity within your design and understanding. You don't need to have to explain what character design is, or good design for that matter. If you have to tell me that that's a 60-year-old drunken cowboy who's had a very rough, tough day, maybe your job's kind of lost there. So it's very important to make sure that you have, clarity, and who or what or why and everything this character exists. So now we're going to kind of move on to character and start explaining that process. Okay, now when breaking down the character, we need to know certain aspects, such as who. Who is this character? Is it Elvis Presley? Is it a cab driver? Where? Is this in the city? Is it take place in the desert? Does this person or do these characters live up in space? And we also need to know when. When is this happening? Is it taking place 100 years in the future, 20 years in the future? Is it contemporary? Is it happening today? Is it happening now? Was it happening 50 years ago? So these are key factors you want to establish as you're starting to develop your character. And also, as you progress and you have meetings with people and you're talking with directors, these are the certain questions that you would want to ask them to start to figure out and break down your character so it'll make your job easier. Because the less you know about your character, the harder it's going to be for you to draw that character, and you're going to be staring at a blank page. So the more you can find out, the more you can write down, and the better you are able to describe all the certain details of your character, the easier your job's going to get through the development process. Another characteristic is personality. You want to understand those sort of traits about the person. Their appearance. Are they shaggy? Are they really primed and proper? Are they wearing real baggy clothes? Are they have real, tight clothes? Understanding this sort of thing. Also, their appearance. Are they wearing hats? Are they wearing glasses? Does this sort of person wear a lot of chains on them? You need to understand that sort of thing. Another important aspect is understanding what their age is, because someone may tell you we need this certain character, and they'll describe all these certain things, and then you end up drawing a 20-year-old kid, and they'll say no, they need to be 40 to 50 years old. So it's very important when you're doing this. Something that you're doing as a character designer too is you become the casting director for a movie. If once you've been given that script by the director, you know what your movie's going to be, at that point you determine who you're going to cast. Is this the right role for Danny DeVito? Is this the right role for Arnold Schwarzenegger? And these are all the certain things that you're going to be thinking about when you're trying to fit that role. It's the same with the television animation. Who is this person? And just understanding, the more you know, the easier your job's going to be. Understanding their mannerisms, these sort of habits and different things do they do, twitching of something or whatever it may be, dealing with their mannerisms, their attitude. Is this person real snobby? Is this person real aggressive? Is this person extremely cheerful? That's very important too as you're starting to develop the look and feel of these characters. And also understanding their physical details. And that kind of comes into their big noses, their ear shape, their square. Do they have a square face? Jaw? Do they have a real no chin? Do they have a real high forehead? And the more you start to kind of write down, once again, let the paper do all the problem solving for you. The more you write down, the easier it's going to get. There is something to be said, of course, for just sitting and just starting to draw, but the more you know, the easier your job's going to be. So keep that in mind. Now, there are certain aspects that you can use for trying to come up with characters when you're approaching them from scratch. One is when you're designing a character, you can base characters on yourself. That helps when you're starting to develop new ideas and new things, because you know yourself, you know about you, you know what your habits are, you know how you feel, you know how you look. And this is actually going to be one of the exercises we're going to be doing in the class, is basing a character on ourselves, just so that we can incorporate all these certain aspects into it. Another thing that I've used a lot when I'm drawing a lot of characters, basing it on people I know, because that's another thing which makes my job easier. If I know the person, if I know how they look, how they dress, it makes it easier for me to maybe come up with incidental characters or anything like that. So on shows like Clerks and Kim Possible and Danny Phantom, for instance, I would put in a lot of characters that, of people that I knew, just because it made my job a lot easier. It wasn't necessarily starting from scratch. And another thing to do is base it on people you've seen. I just want to mention too that there's a different type of characters when you're working on an animated series. For instance, one, you're always going to be developing your main cast, your main characters who are going to be in the show every single episode because they're what the show is really all about. And these are your main characters, and these are the ones who, usually take the longest to develop in the beginning. Along with the main characters, there are always the supporting characters. For instance, you have Kim Possible as the main character, you have Ron Stoppable as the support character. Then beyond that, you have all the other regular incidental characters that appear in the show that are just going to be, maybe some of them have dialogue, some of them don't. They're going to be in the background, they'll be sitting in a coffee shop, they'll be walking through the classroom halls, whatever they may be. That's where you come up with a lot of your incidental characters where there's a lot more freedom. Technically, there'd be a lot more, sometimes the written description of these incidental characters that may have one line, 5 lines of dialogue, and they come into a scene and they say some things. And usually the writers will give a little description based on that, but not all the time. So understanding that, that's where you're going to also come up with the different people you've seen. So but that's why it's handy and important to carry a sketchbook and draw as much as you can, because once you do that, then you start to get ideas of what people look like, and the more you do that, the easier your job's gonna be. Another thing, when you think about people you've seen, for instance, something like, say, the Beatles. You think of the Beatles, and I brings to mind the Jungle Book. When you think of the vultures in Jungle Book, here they've taken the Beatles in a sense, but they've turned them into these vultures in this movie, and it was just great because here you have these known personalities, just people that everyone's familiar with, and you kind of adapt to helps you with a great look and everything you're about to do. Something you also want to do when you're designing characters, which you'll come up with a lot of, which helps, is basing your characters on cliches. And a cliche is something that is pretty much stereotyped, it's overused, it's very common, but it's something that helps as a launching point. That could be the snobby hotel manager, the rich politician, the crazy mad scientist, the dumb jock, the fat mob boss, the drugged out alcoholic rocker. And these are the certain cliches that'll help as a launching point, and then you can put a twist on those cliches. All of a sudden you can change those sort of things around, but at least it's a launching point. For instance, what comes to mind, if you have seen Cats Don't Dance, they had Darla Dimple, which was a great character, which was this young little Shirley Temple character, yet she was the villain of the movie. So it's kind of taking this cliche of this Shirley Temple, cute little girl, feminine little girl, but they gave it that twist of that being the. And once you have an understanding of those type of people, it makes your job a lot easier too, because we know what these people look like. We know what the fireman looks like. We know what the policeman looks like. But the thing to go beyond that is understanding more about what type of characters these policemen are going to be, or the firemen. When you start to break it down and you start to do your lineup and you say you're doing a policeman, is he a young or is he an old policeman? Well, I'll make him old. Is he fat or a thin policeman? Well, I'm going to make him a fat old policeman. Well, is he angry? Is he happy? Well, I'm going to make him a fat old angry policeman. And then you go, well, I'm going to make this guy, a fat, old, angry policeman who is corrupted. So the more you start to figure it out, the easier it becomes, and you start to think about things you've seen, movies you've watched, and these are all experiences and things that you're going to incorporate within your drawings. So keep all these things in mind as we're going through this, and every time you're developing your character, start to jot these things down. The beautiful thing about this is that you can watch this contrast, unity, color, value, variety, rhythm, flow, placement, scale, and proportion. And these are all the things, the more you have an understanding of these, the more you incorporate them into your work, the more it becomes just intuitive and natural. So you not going to have to think about every single one of these every single time you draw something, because you want to have fun and you want to stay loose. But these, as I'm teaching this, I want you to understand these, and the more you understand these concepts, the easier it's going to be every time you look at your drawings, every time you start designing. If two, three, four of these things pop into your head, then you're going to have a successful drawing. So we're going to discuss more of this into next week and the following weeks after. And for this week's assignment, I've left a character description of a character that I would like for you to design. You don't have to color him or do anything else. I would just like for you to draw him, and this is mainly for me to see at what level you're at, and as I'm working with you one-on-one, it's going to make it a lot easier for me to really help you figure out any problems that you may be having. So please be sure to go to the assignment page and do your assignment for the week. And thanks, guys, and I'll talk to you during the week.